Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. We go immediately to the war fighting, much on the minds of leaders in Washington and Brussels and Moscow. The war fighting we begin with, however, is an old story made new again. You recall Kandahar province, Kandahar, the city in southern Afghanistan. To my memory, reaching back to 2002, the end of the first campaign the U.S. launched against the Taliban, Kandahar was the last major pocket to collapse. And the Taliban retreated in their Toyotas, the vehicle of choice for rascals, into Baluchistan, retreated back to Pakistan. There was no pursuit, of course. At that time, we were pretending that Pakistan was a sovereign country. That city was also the scene of lots of sacrifice by our allies, the Canadians. I recall the Canadians moving in there with deploying elements that were trying to educate the local people, give them other incomes besides being gangsters. However, that pocket was also invested by major warfighting units for the U.S. military, for ISAF over these years. I recall talking to airborne troops as they were deployed into Kandahar province. That area was also the first, as I recall, that General Petraeus visited with his surge, Afghanistan style, when he took over in 2009. This is early Obama administration. Well, Kandahar's in the news again. And Bill Roggio and Tom Joscelyn of the Foundation of the Defense of Democracies are here to give us this war fighting on a large canvas. We're going to begin in Afghanistan and then move to Iraq and Syria. Bill, a very good evening to you. The Taliban is making control of a district in Kandahar. What is the significance of the Taliban getting this close to Kandahar? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Yes, the Taliban claimed over the weekend it took over a district called Gorak. It's in northeastern Kandahar. The Taliban now controls or contests contiguous territory in the neighboring provinces of Uruzgan and northern Helmand province. This is basically the heartland of the Taliban. It's where a lot of their fighting forces and their leaders, their top political and religious and military leaders come from. So they're claiming to control one of the districts in the north. We have one of the districts in the south to be under complete control, and then the rest are a question mark. We're tracking this, but we believe that several other districts in northern Kandahar are also contested, which means the Taliban can control half or more, or the government may just control the district centers and little else. With the Taliban, so what they did up in north, of course, is took control of the provincial capital. It's now contested mainly in government control. Took the provincial capital up north in Kunduz. I think the Taliban are seeking to show that they can storm the other provincial capitals. They launched an offensive in neighboring Ghazni province in southeastern Afghanistan and attempted to take control of the city. I think they're going to do the same and take control of Kandahar city, as well as Lashkar Gah in Helmand province and Tarin-Kot in Uruzgan. I think you could see efforts over the next couple months, over the next year, for the Taliban to just overtly seize control of these areas and force out the Afghans.
Do they have the forces to overrun Kandahar the way they did Kunduz, Bill?
I believe they may. It's difficult to really know. They don't publish an order of battle. They don't tell us exactly how many forces they have under their command. And certainly the push up north in Kunduz, there's rumors that the Taliban reinforced from the south to do this. I suspect that may be true to an extent, but I think the Taliban, if they were fully organized and funded and armed, I think they could overrun either Tarin-Kot or Lashkar Gah or Kandahar city, or two or three of the cities, depending. I think they're close to doing it in the next year or so.
It reminds me of the scene with Henry Fonda in Fort Apache when the officer first arrives. Dusty, he asks arrogantly of his assistants, who are those nasty-looking Indians at the front gate? And the answer, I paraphrase from the great John Ford Western, is, if you saw them, sir, they weren't Apaches. Tom, we go to a town, Quneitra, that is abandoned, has been abandoned on the Golan Heights since the wars of the 20th century. But right now, there is a place in the neighborhood of Quneitra called UN Hill that seems to be fought over by absolutely everybody with guns in the region. Who controls it now? Why is this important? Good evening to you, Tom.
Good evening, John. Well, the Hill, according to various reports, has changed hands a couple times over the last several days. I'm not really sure as of this evening exactly who was in control of it, but the Syrian army was claiming success last I saw in driving the jihadis out. What's interesting about this hill, now it sounds strange to be battling over this hill, but there's some territory here that basically is very key for the approach to Damascus and to the suburbs of Damascus. And the whole idea is that if the jihadis and their allies can control this hill and some of the other surrounding areas, then they can basically start to make a push and cut off the regime from some very strategic areas to the west of Damascus. Now, the most important thing about the battle reporting here is that a group, the Free Syrian Army's Southern Front, so-called Southern Front as they call it, claimed early on that this hill had been liberated by its forces. But as we were tracking this, we actually saw that al-Nusra Front, which is al-Qaeda, claimed actually before the Southern Front that they had actually liberated the hill, quote-unquote liberated, that's how they talk, and that some of its jihadi allies had also claimed that they were in part of the battle and they had liberated. Now, this is very important because the Southern Front was considered for a time to be the Free Syrian Army, or the part of the Free Syrian Army that was the least tainted by its jihadi ties, by connections to al-Qaeda and these other groups. There was earlier this year, the Southern Front made a big deal of putting out statements saying we're not going to cooperate with al-Qaeda in Syria. They don't stand for the future of Syria. We're opposed to them and their vision of Syria. We're going to do this on our own, and that we're not going to cooperate with them and fight side by side with them in battle. Now, that probably wasn't even true at the time they were saying it, but as you can see in this battle for UN Hill now in the Quneitra province, it's absolutely clear that, in fact, they are fighting side by side with al-Qaeda.
We have a battle here within easy distance of the Israeli border, correct, Tom? I'm looking at al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, perhaps ISIS, but certainly the Free Syrian Army. We have reason to believe that there are other players here, for example, representatives of the IRGC, all in a very small piece of territory. You can stand on a hill in Israel on the Golan Heights and see the smoke from Damascus. So this whole battlefield could be flown over in seconds by a high-performance aircraft. Have I got the location correct?
That's correct. It's one of several battles in the area that have been raged over the last couple of weeks in that area, right near the Israeli border, right near the Golan Heights. This is stuff it's something that I think the Israeli officials have certainly been keeping track of for a long time. I don't think they were quick to recognize what Nusra Front or al-Qaeda was doing in the area. In fact, you can see some comments by Israeli officials in the press over the last couple of years that were sort of not very concerned about al-Qaeda making gains here. They thought, Nusra Front isn't as bad as ISIS or isn't as bad as these other groups, and therefore, this isn't that big of a deal. I think that's a huge mistake. I think if Nusra Front continues to make gains, al-Qaeda continues to make gains and continue to build more support for itself, that in the long run is going to be a fierce foe to deal with in Syria. And being that close to Israel and certainly that whole strategic area there, it's only a matter of time before they try and make a bigger push in that direction as well.
Does the U.S. or its allies supply the southern front of the Free Syrian Army with weapons?
It's interesting. They probably were at one point. They probably still are. There have been mixed reports, according to my sources, about Jordan cutting them off. Jordan was really the key actor here in supplying the southern front, obviously for geographic and other reasons. But, you talk to some of the people I've talked to, say the Jordanians came to believe that the whole thing was compromised, that basically the Southern Front was not a pure play at all, that it wasn't something you could keep weapons and sort of training and weapons out of the hands of, the jihadis, including al-Qaeda and its allies. And so therefore, the Jordanians sort of scaled it back. I'm not sure where it is right now. I know if you look at the Syrian battlefield, what's happening is that the U.S. is supplying Free Syrian Army groups or brigades through its allies, through cutouts, and oftentimes these Free Syrian brigades or groups are actually fighting under the auspices of al-Nusra Front, which is al-Qaeda and its closest allies in Syria. So what al-Qaeda is doing is basically they set up these alliances, they allow these brigades to exist because they're receiving valuable weaponry, and as long as those weapons are pointed at the right targets as far as al-Qaeda is concerned, then they take advantage of it. And I think this is sort of a huge strategic hole in our whole game plan for Syria. Not that there is any strategy on the U.S. part, but when you see in the press, as we have over the last couple of days, U.S. officials taking credit, for example, for the quote-unquote rebels' gains in northwestern Syria, this is really baffling. I mean, those gains have been made by an alliance known as Jaish al-Fatah, they call themselves. This is run by al-Qaeda and its closest jihadi allies. this isn't something we should be celebrating.
Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. A vast battlefield, and we're just dealing with theaters of Afghanistan, Kandahar province, and Quneitra, which is in a stone's throw, actually stone's throw, from the Israeli border. And when we come back, we're going to Anbar province in Iraq and an attempt to decapitate the Islamic State. I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor with Bill Roggio and Tom Joscelyn, the war-fighting reporters on Long War Journal. The landscape, we've been to Afghanistan, then we touched at the Israeli border in Syria. Now we get to Anbar province, and what we're told was the Iraqi Ministry of Defense launching an airstrike on Baghdadi's convoy. Baghdadi, according to the legend, is in former Iraqi security officer, may or may not be accurate. There are a lot of shadows here. Bill, the airstrike looked to be a reach, perhaps a piece of information, then again, perhaps a piece of PR. What did they hit? What are they claiming they hit? Because not Baghdadi.
Right, John. So on late Saturday or early Sunday, they claimed that they had intelligence that Baghdadi was being transported to Anbar province to hold a meeting to discuss the defense of Ramadi. I've seen reports that he was even heading to Ramadi. The airstrike took place in just outside of Al-Qaim in a small town called Karabla. They claim there was Baghdadi and senior officers in the Islamic State, probably military officers, were in the convoy. But the Iraqi military was clear that they think that they got him that he escaped and was moved to a car and whatnot. And I saw a report today that one Iraqi intelligence officer is saying they don't even think Baghdadi was there. But very likely it was a convoy of something worth hitting, whether it was high-level Islamic State officers or just a convoy crossing the border, because remember, they control both sides of that border in that region. Who knows?
Bill, does Iraq have an air force that it can deploy? Are these Russian pilots? Do we know anything about the quality of their ground control or air control, anything at all?
They have attack helicopters. They have some MiGs, and they have some ground attack aircraft as well. So it's a small air force, but it's capable of striking targets within the country. So it's possible there may be either Russian or Iranian pilots flying some of these sorties. That certainly wouldn't be surprising to me.
Mercenaries, maybe. What about this claim that Baghdadi was wounded and treated by doctors in Mosul? Is this the kind of thing they hand out to their forces to make them feel better?
That report came in early May, and this is why if that report was true, which everyone treated as such, claiming that Baghdadi was wounded in a U.S. airstrike.
This is last spring. In other words, this is another one of those, we kill him 15 times,
exactly.
And then we see what comes
vampire,
back.
Right. He's not dead unless they chop his head off, the stakes in the heart, and you expose him to sunlight. I mean, if you don't believe reports that Baghdadi's dead, unless either the Islamic State is saying it or maybe the U.S. military. The Iraqis are wildly inconsistent. Baghdadi's been killed and wounded multiple times.
The Iraqis are as unreliable as the Pakistanis. That's the worst thing I could say about anybody when war reporting.
That is bad.
Yeah, I want to review that statement later, just in case it goes too far. Tom, you have a report of the Islamic State very active in Aleppo province. Why?
Well, what they did was early on in the Russian airstrikes, Russia has not been targeting primarily the Islamic State. They have hit them in some places, but most of the airstrikes, if you count them up, have been hitting Jaish al-Fatah, which is this coalition led by Nusra Front and Arar al-Sham, two very powerful jihadi groups, one of which is al-Qaeda's official branch in Syria, and their allies, because that group, that coalition, and their allies have been the ones that have really taken territory from Assad this year. This is something we've been warning about over and over again, that basically this is the third major prong in the Syrian war that most people underestimate or don't really understand. And so Russia comes in and basically starts trying to hit their positions, hard. And they also hit, of course, CIA-backed groups, CIA groups that are getting tow missiles and that sort of thing, and others that are legitimately, not as bad as the worst of the worst in terms of the Syrian rebels, in terms of Al-Qaeda. But what the Islamic State does is they have no qualms about coming in behind other rebel groups opposed to the Assad regime, and taking their territory away from them. And so as Russia was bombing these other groups that are legitimately fighting Assad and taking territory from Assad, the Islamic State came in behind them and took several key towns and villages north of Aleppo city. And this is very much by design by the Islamic State. If you look at how they've grown in Syria since 2013, it's consistently been at the expense of other insurgency organizations, including its cousin yet rival Al-Qaeda and unrelated groups. Now, they have fought the Islamic State, contrary to what some people the Islamic State has fought the Assad regime, contrary to what some people say. There have been battles between the two sides, both in eastern Syria and, of course, in Palmyra and elsewhere. But primarily what the Islamic State has done in terms of gaining territory has really been at the expense of other organizations that are fighting the Assad regime. And they did the same thing here, basically swooping in behind them and taking up territory very quickly.
They've grabbed villages associated with al-Nusra. Can we say who was controlling these villages and who lost? There's a zero-sum game here. Who lost?
It gets very murky, but you can even see in some of the pictures that the Islamic State put out that there is this coalition or alliance known as the sort of Levantine alliance, something along those lines. In basically, it's an alliance of several different or multiple groups in the Aleppo area, and it gets very murky because if you look at it carefully, what's happening is that one of al-Nusra Front's closest allies, Arar al-Sham, which has its own ties to Al-Qaeda, is part of all these alliances there in Aleppo, and it looks like they were actually involved in retaking some of the towns or trying to retake some of the towns from the Islamic State after this initial push. So it becomes very, very convoluted, John. It's very complex to track. You really do have, it's sort of a Game of Thrones on amphetamines when you look at Syria, because it's just so many different players going at each other at any given time.
Bill, you report the death of an Iranian general in Aleppo province, in the region that Tom's just talking about. Do we know how he died? Do we know anything about the contact with the enemy that killed him?
No, there's all the Iranians said was that I'll quote it, is he was killed by Islamic State terrorists while in an advisory mission in Syria near Aleppo. So he clearly was on the ground with probably either Hezbollah or Syrian troops. We don't know who he was fighting with or exactly how he was killed. The Islamic State has previously killed an Iranian general with a sniper by sniper fire, so it's possible they're looking to pick off senior leaders. But we just don't know anything other than what the Iranians said. The Islamic State never even really commented on this, which is surprising. I would have expected I suspect they didn't know it until.
So we don't know if it was a suicide attack, if it was brought down an aircraft. We don't know anything, whether it was a sniper, nothing at all. They didn't give any hints.
No hints at all, no.
That's an important piece of information. Bill Roggio and Tom Joscelyn, they keep the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.